Welcome back to another dream diary. My daughter disappeared in the woods, only to reappear at our front door weeks later. My daughter, Ellen, is 13 years old but has the wisdom of someone much older. She's always been independent, never causing trouble, and always knowing what's best for herself. She's never needed help and has always relied solely on herself. Her sister Leah was the opposite, always looking for trouble. Things began to take a turn when she turned 10. My wife, Lauren, and I initially found it cute that she wanted to do everything on her own. But soon, it spiraled out of control. Ellen would completely break down if we tried to help her. She never asked for help with school or for advice about boys like most preteens would. Our concern grew when she stopped eating and lost 10 pounds because she was so focused on school. So we sought advice from other parents on how to help her. They suggested things like taking a vacation or having a family game night every Friday. We had already tried these ideas, but nothing seemed to work. Ellen always found a way to focus on schoolwork. We kept asking for suggestions until one couple said, "Take her on a camping trip." Lauren and I seriously considered this idea. A secluded cabin by a beautiful lake seemed like the perfect chance for some uninterrupted family time. Little did we know, it would be the worst decision of our lives. On June 28th, we left for the cabin. Leah stayed with my sister that week because we wanted to give Ellen the attention she might needed. Lauren's parents had passed away, leaving her the cabin where they used to camp. Lauren was excited since she hadn't been there since she was 17. I remember the entire trip clearly. It's hard to forget a day like that. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies, just the right amount of wind, and we had a little party in the car. Of course, Ellen didn't join in. As we neared the cabin, the smooth road turned to gravel. When we arrived, Ellen immediately jumped out of the car and ran down to the lake. It was strange because she usually hated lakes, calling them infested with bacteria and diseases. Lauren and I unpacked the car while Ellen sat quietly by the lake. "This is going much better than we planned," Lauren remarked as she placed her suitcase inside the cabin. "I agree, this was a good idea," I replied while unloading the last of the bags. Lauren took her things upstairs to our room while I explored the cabin. I had never been there before, so everything was new to me. After about 2 hours, Ellen still hadn't come inside. Lauren and I didn't worry at first since she seemed to be enjoying the outdoors, but as it started to get dark, I went out to call her and while Lauren was cooking burgers. "Ellen," I called, "dinner's almost ready, come inside." There was no answer. "Ellen?" I called again, louder this time. Suddenly, Ellen jumped out from behind me and scared me half to death. "Oh my gosh, Ellen, don't do that!" I exclaimed, clutching my heart through my shirt. Ellen grinned and walked inside. She was acting more childish than usual, but I brushed it off, thinking the change in environment might be relaxing her. We ate our hamburgers and went upstairs to sleep. Ellen seemed happier and more energetic, completely different from her usual sad, gloomy, and exhausted self at home. After Lauren finished brushing her teeth, I told her about Ellen scaring me outside. Lauren just said it was the change of scenery, but I couldn't shake a bad feeling. However, I was too tired to dwell on it and fell asleep. I woke up first the next morning and decided to make breakfast. After cooking pancakes, I went upstairs to wake the girls. Lauren was sleeping peacefully, so I gently shook her awake. "Rise and shine, breakfast is ready," I said. Lauren smiled and got up. As I headed to Ellen's room, a wave of rotten stench hit me. I almost threw up but managed to swallow it back. I slowly opened Ellen's door to find her window open and a dead deer lying beside her bed. The deer was mutilated, its insides were outside, its eyes were missing, and bugs crawled all over it. I looked around, but Ellen was gone. I shouted for Lauren, telling her that Ellen was missing. Lauren ran into Ellen's room, nearly vomiting at the sight. She quickly ran back to our room and called 911. It took the police 2 hours to reach the cabin since we were in the middle of nowhere. They searched around the cabin and a bit into the woods but only found a piece of Ellen's clothing. We had to leave our belongings at the cabin so the detectives could continue their search. Lauren and I were questioned. What were you doing when she went missing? Did she act differently beforehand? Eventually, we were allowed to go home. Lauren fell sick a few days after Ellen's disappearance, so I took more time off work to care for her. She wouldn't eat and had constant nightmares about Ellen and the dead deer. I got her into therapy 2 weeks after Ellen went missing because I was worried about what Lauren might do to herself. I didn't know how to explain it to Leah, so I told her that her sister went on a school camping trip. Lauren slowly improved with each therapy session and started eating more. That night, we were having chicken Alfredo when we heard a soft knock on the door. At first, we thought it was the wind, but the knock soon turned into a bang. We both jumped and stared at the door for a minute before I got up to check. I opened the door slowly, and there she was, Ellen, standing on the front steps. She smelled horrible and looked like she had been through hell. I quickly let her inside, and Lauren ran to her, sobbing and hugging her tightly. I called an ambulance while giving Ellen a tight hug, despite her awful smell. At the hospital, doctors were already waiting outside with a stretcher. Ellen was rushed inside while Lauren and I waited. After about 25 minutes, a nurse came out to let us into her room. Ellen didn't say anything. Even when the police came to question her, she remained silent. She was discharged the next day since her injuries weren't severe. On the way home, I glanced at the rearview mirror to check on Ellen and saw her staring at me, her eyes empty of any emotion. Startled, I quickly looked away. When we got home, Ellen immediately went up to her room and slammed the door so hard that it made me jump. Lauren and I were worried when she didn't come down for dinner. As we were getting ready for bed, I heard a thump from her room. Lauren and I rushed to her room and were shocked by what we saw, a deer head with missing eyes on top of the drawers. Ellen standing next to it with gaze while smiling. My friend Jess was once driving back home from her parents' house through a rural area in Southern. It was late at night, and the road ahead was quiet, until she saw it was suddenly blocked by what she described as a large log. Annoyed, she realized this was the only road she could take without adding another hour to her drive. She got out of the car to inspect the log, noting that in this part of the area, wildlife encounters are rare, so there wasn't anything unusual about it. She started moving the log off the road. It's unclear how long it took her, but by the time she was done, another car had pulled up behind her. Thinking the driver was just waiting for her to finish, she got back in her car and resumed driving. That's when she noticed the car behind her was following closely. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. After all, they were on a single road with only one direction to go. However, her concern grew when she entered the next town, and the car continued to tail her. Panicking, Jess called the police and explained the situation, letting them know she was heading home so they could intercept the car. Knowing it would take the police a few more minutes to arrive, she decided to park a few houses away from her own home to avoid drawing attention. She stayed in her seat to see if the car would pass by, but the driver parked directly behind her. Now even more anxious, she locked the doors and grabbed her pepper spray, ready for anything. A man got out of the car, walked up to her window, and waved. He gestured towards the back of her car. Confused but curious, Jess cracked the window just enough to ask him what he wanted. The man explained that he had been following her to warn her. When she had stopped to move the log, a stranger had snuck into her trunk. Jess was in shock and terrified. At first, she didn't believe him, but when he showed her the call he had made to the police earlier, she decided to trust him. Soon after, the police arrived, checked her trunk, and found a man hiding inside. They arrested him on the spot. It turns out the driver was telling the truth all along. He had only been following her to help. As for the man in her trunk, Jess never learned exactly who he was, but it was clear his intentions were far from innocent. Subscribe.